Hello and welcome back. For those of you who are just joining us, the Glass House Festival brings together a collection of over 100 poets in support of creative workers who've been negatively impacted by COVID. The Glass House Festival is promoted wholly by the Art Mantram Trust, an organization founded in 1999 for promoting the arts, artists, and art awareness. This session is particularly apt for our times. It is called Singing in the Dark and brings together a panel of K. Satchidanandan, Nishi Chawla, Amir Orr, George Szirtes, and our moderator, Elizabeth Kuruvilla, who is the commission editor of the anthology that has brought these poets together. Elizabeth Kuruvilla has been executive editor, eBury Publishing and Vintage Publishing, Penguin Random House, and previously a journalist working with leading national newspapers and magazines such as The Hindu, Mint, Hindustan Times, The Indian Express, and Open Magazine. The anthology she commissioned, Singing in the Dark, a global anthology of poetry under lockdown, has been edited by K. Satchidanandan and Nishi Chawla, both of whom are joining us here today. Thank you so much for being with us. Over to you now.
Thank you so much, Yumna. And thank you to Art Mantram for hosting us on your platform. I think I should start by introducing each of the poets who are part of the panel. And I'm going to quickly do that before we ask them about their works and to read their poetry out to you. Amir Orr is an established Israeli poet. He's a novelist and an essayist as well, and whose works have been published in 45 different languages. He's the author of 12 volumes of poetry, and his most recent books in Hebrew are The Madman's Prophecy, Lute and Wings. Next to him is George Szirtes. He was born in Hungary and he moved to England in 1956. His first book, The Slant Door, won the Faber Memorial Prize. Bridge Passages, which was published in 1991, was shortlisted for the Whitbread Poetry Prize. And Reel in 2004 won the T.S. Eliot Prize. He's also written extensively for the radio and is the author of more than a dozen plays, musicals, opera libretti, and oratorios, sorry for my pronunciation. And he has also translated and edited several anthologies and collections of Hungarian poetry, and he's won numerous prizes for those as well. Nishi Chawla is an academician and a writer. She has 6 collections of poetry, 9 plays, 2 screenplays, and 2 novels to her credit. She taught at Delhi University as a professor of English for nearly 2 decades before moving to the US, where she taught for another, I think, 15 years at the University of Maryland. And she's now part of the faculty of the Thomas Edison State University in New Jersey. And Dr. K. Satchidanandan is a leading, well-known Indian poet who has 24 collections of poetry, 4 books of travel, a collection of one-act plays, 2 books for children, and several collections of critical essays to his name. He has been a professor of English as well as the chief executive of the Sahitya Academy. He is a fellow of the Kerala Sahitya Academy and has won numerous literary awards from different states as well as countries, which includes the Sahitya Academy Award, the India-Poland Friendship Medal from the Government of Poland, a knighthood from the Government of Italy, and the World Prize for Poetry for Peace from the Government of the UAE. His recent collections in English include While I Write, Misplaced Objects and Other Poems, The Missing Ribs, Questions from the Dead, and The Whispering Tree. All four of them have contributed poems to the anthology Singing in the Dark, which has been edited by Nishi Chawla and K. Satchidanandan as well. Singing in the Dark, it's inspired by the pandemic that's been flung upon us over these past few months and the experiences that we've had since. It's an experience like nothing we have probably experienced in our lifetime, and there are varying emotions, experiences, observations, all of which feature in some way or the other in this anthology. I'm going to not say anything more about it myself and ask the anthology editors to speak a little more about it. Dr. Nishi Chawla, I would like to ask you first. I think the idea first sprung from your mind and then this global journey began. Would you tell us a little bit about how the anthology came about?
I thank you, Elizabeth, for this opportunity. Let me begin with a quote from Archibald MacLeish. A poem should be equal to, not true, for all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf. A poem should not mean, but be. The truth behind the paradox that the poet writes about is the special way that a poem uses language. Poems do not use words to convey factual information, but to communicate experience. Poems are also wordless in the sense that the words cannot be translated, and yet poetry accomplishes its purpose, not through words, but by means of the metaphorical images created by the words. Poetry addresses itself not to the intellect, but to deeper, more abstract, more emotional levels. Coming now to the point where the seed for this anthology was sown. Well, as a writer, I'm constantly searching for ideas and experiences that incubate within me and then suddenly implode. Deep down, all of us are searching for our own commonality, not in our unique individuality, but through our familiar ways of thinking and behaving. It is in our archetypes, our common joys and suffering, our experiences that we find our commonness. This is the overarching goal of our anthology, Singing in the Dark. Emily Dickinson talks about telling all the truth, but tell it slant. Although poetry is a temporal art, and although a particular poem is the product of a particular time, a good poem will seem independent of time. A poem needs to be static and dynamic at the same time. Well, our goal here in this anthology is to enhance the creative awareness and experiential depth of a larger world community by offering meaningful poems about how the pandemic has impacted our lives amid diverse cultures in diverse ways. We hope to create a more inclusive social order thereby. For the impulse that drives us to art is the same that wants us to believe that our humanity is one and the same. We call serious poetry that causes us to see ourselves and the world in greater depth and clarity. Its truth, its moral dimensions, and its wider social significance are things that seize us immediately. The blood is chilled, and we see for the first time what should have been obvious. Life and poetry occupy very different spheres, but with poetry, we travel with our eyes open through a different world that is cruel, uplifting, and beautiful. We understand our place in the larger scheme of things. That is, of course, the journey that we are taking through Singing in the Dark Times. Thank you. I turn things over to Dr. Satchidanandan, my co-editor.
Yeah, I have always believed in what James Joyce once said about writers. He said, "Excuse us, we are olives," in the sense that it is when we really suffer. It is in the most tragic of times that the poets bring the best out of them. And this strange time of the pandemic, I believe, is one such tragic episode in human history that has really brought out some of the best elements in all the writers and particularly poets. I especially believe it is a time for poetry because poetry alone can capture the complexity and the diversity of the experience that we are passing through. I know a lot of philosophers, right from Slavoj Žižek to Giorgio Agamben, have commented on these times in their own ways. A lot of philosophers have philosophized on this moment. But I believe that there's a lot of simplification in what they say. And maybe to overcome that, we need to turn to poets who, in fact, deal with this extremely complex and plural experience in all its diverse dimensions. And that's exactly what we have striven to do in this anthology. Began with a few poets from the United States and from India, but gradually the collection evolved into an intercontinental collection of poetic responses to the diverse aspects of the pandemic, from the trauma of solitude to the unexpected transformation in the expression of human relationships and the new visibility of the class divide to the marvelous revival of nature with the return of birds and butterflies, filling up the arid cityscapes with colors and songs, and the ultimate realization of the transience of human existence. The moods vary when you move from poet to poet, from quiet contemplation and shocking anguish to suppressed rage and careful celebration. Consisting of poems of recall, experience, and dream, this book has evolved, I believe, into a virtual aesthetic archive of these strange and difficult times. An archive that I'm sure will be cherished by many generations to come. This is what we have striven to do. And when we thought of the title, we came across, it always comes to my memory, Bertolt Brecht's famous lines in the poem called The Motto. Will there be singing in the dark? He asks, and he himself answers, yes, singing about the dark times. And so this anthology, in fact, contains songs about the dark times, even though the songs are not necessarily dark. They give hope, and that, I think, is one of the essential functions of poetry, giving hope in the most desperate of times. Even when you speak of despair, you always dream of another time when we will overcome the pandemic and the darkness and the chaos will move to better, brighter times. This has been the purpose. We believe, both of us, that the purpose has, to a great extent at least, been served by this collection. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the unique things about this collection is the fact, as both of you have mentioned, that there are more than 100 poets who've contributed poems here, and they spread across continents. And I think it's a very important thing because, I mean, it's a global pandemic at the end of the day, and while each country has definitely had its unique experiences. For instance, in India, the image of migrant workers trekking across hundreds of kilometers to reach home has burnt a hole in all of our minds, and it's reflected in some of the poems that feature in the anthology. But as such, what really struck me when I read it as a whole was the universality of emotions and experiences. It was really borderless. I would really like to ask you what about your observations about poetry that emerged from different geographical locations. Dr. Chawla, would you like to take this question?
Could you repeat the question, please?
I was talking about the anthology, which includes poetry from 6 different continents. One would expect that poetry from different countries would have a reflection of those unique experiences, but really the thoughts expressed are universal. They could, the poets could be sitting in any part of the world, and you react to it in a similar manner. Did you find that?
Absolutely. So it does break down books, and it does kind of, bring us all together in such ineluctable ways. Absolutely about that. And the pandemic has certainly broken down, not just from a biomedical perspective, but also, from the way digitization, the information infrastructure, and access to internet connection has kind of exacerbated the kind of economic gap in lockdown situations. It has also kind of, it's like fighting the virus foregrounds that fiscal space, the institutional spaces, and the capacities and the relentless power of the privileged, so to say, to engage in social distancing in more effective ways. Yes, the poets in our anthology have focused about the heightened risks for survival among the disenfranchised, the marginalized, as well as, their own unique individual personal experiences. So in that sense, yes, it does break down borders. It brings us all together in reflecting on our own, on our common humanity, on how all of us are surviving, being challenged by, and certainly accepting in our different ways this very uncommon occurrence that has kind of struck us from the start of 2020. Does that respond well or address what you were looking for?
I wanted to ask Mr. Szirtes, I started by talking about the uniqueness of this experience of this pandemic. You have 5 sonnets in the collection, and you kind of break that myth, So you are kind of a chronicler there, speaking of smallpox and cholera and Spanish flu, and first of all, I mean, I would really love it if you could read some of your poetry. And secondly, I really wanted to, in these 5 sonnets, though they were written when we were in the throes of the pandemic, where the personal experience was uppermost in our mind, but you write from a distance, so to say, So it's I find it amazing how you managed to do that. But perhaps first, it would be great if you could read out the poems for our viewers, so they know what we're talking about.
Okay, this is a set of 5 what I call Baroque plague sonnets. These were written fairly early in a lockdown that we had really from March the 23rd. And I was writing daily poems about our personal situation. So this was a change. This was something different as a way of stepping back. I'll read 3 of these. This is the second one, Black Death. The man with the broad-brimmed hat and bird mask waits a moment before entering. His scent wafts by you, Highness, as presentiment of what must follow. Watch how he operates in his full gown. Observe how he inspects the body, turning it here and there at distance with his cane, meeting no resistance. Note how he prods it. He's the bird that pecks at corruption. He sees the patient hands are black with the usual buboes. That is all by the script. It's the very reason for his call. The plague is spreading. It makes strict demands. We watch familiar birds hovering in the air. They will not ring the bell, nor are we there. And this is Cholera, the 3rd poem in the series. Everything begins somewhere. Everything is here. Here is where the enemy starts his long, arduous campaign, launching his first spear. He has no home, has no desire to belong to just one place, and so he moves about. 2 skeletons clench by a fetid pool, and soon a table with a glass of stout and cloudy water carry one to stool, another to feast. You watch a man collapse at one point on the map, one street, and soon everyone's falling. Death runs from open taps and drops from the singer's mouth. There are few remaining, Highness. We watch the sun at noon rise ever higher, burning off late dew. And the 3rd I'll read is the last of the series, our present plague, COVID. Now here we are, in quarantine, our ears sharpened to the footsteps stalking us. We watch the passing of the empty bus as one more phantom carrier appears and swerves around us, grinning as he goes. Elsewhere the poor are jammed into their rooms to gaze from blocks that reek too much of tombs intended for them, while the virus throws its net across the whole estate like smoke. Observe, Highness, how some of them remain still poorer. And while you and I should live, survival will be harder to forgive, though later it might serve for a black joke that you, Highness, might very well explain.
Thank you. That was wonderful. You said you were writing daily, very, very personal poems all through the pandemic.
I describe our situation. We live in a small town.
Okay.
I've lived in this house for over 20 years. And when lockdown came, I have retired from teaching. It was no different from any other day, really. But it was the same every day. So what we had to see personally was either in the news or in press briefings, otherwise it was just a room. So every day I wrote a short poem about whatever there was inside us or outside us. Those were the personal things. At a certain point, I wanted to, if you like, just stand back and regard the current situation as a repetition of a historical one, some of which are very well recorded. The references to the bird mask during the Black Death, that is how people, the doctors dressed, and they carried all kinds of ointments and scents inside those beaks so as to try to keep out the foul air. And the other thing I wanted in these poems, which would be, if you like, quite Baroque in shape and in tone, is the notion that they were being addressed to somebody, a godlike creature, an authority creature, somebody who knows what's happening and who we, as ordinary people, must guide around these various historical situations, which in some respects have not changed at all, although the remedies and the conditions have changed. So that is what brought this on. I wrote this one set, which is different from all the other things. And I thought it was worth trying to do.
I did find the godlike character very interesting, Highness, as he's referred to in all of the five poems. I actually did want to understand why you wanted to do that. You know, is that because you were writing from a distance, so you needed that pedestal to look down upon?
I wanted this person next to me and to show him what he was doing, what he was in charge of. So I had to address him deferentially, possibly slightly ironically, as Highness. He's in a position of a king, or I might imagine him in the position of our Prime Minister, who was in fact in my mind, because he was, although he had spent some time being ill himself, he was a presence throughout this. So one was moving through the whole process, which we are still in. One was moving through this lockdown in a constant company of the man who was making most of the decisions. So I wanted him with me. Look what this is like. Look what that is like. And that took distance in a way. I mean, this is not personal, not our personal circumstances. But I'm lucky we live in a perfectly nice, very old house in a small town. But people who live in high-rise buildings with 2 or 3 children still at home, unable to get out at all, eventually being let out for half an hour and later for an hour. For them, it was almost as though these high-rise buildings where they were trapped were almost purposely put there so that you could be trapped. I know that's unfair, but it sometimes seemed like it in these circumstances. I can't hear you.
Yes, thank you. That's very interesting, and it's interesting to know that your Prime Minister was one of the references. Mr. Orr, I wanted to turn to you, and I think your poems tread a slightly different trajectory. They tend to speak of a new beginning, a new birth, really, out of the darkness and out of the madness. And they speak of fortitude and they speak of resilience. Would you like to, I know that some of them have been written bilingually. You've written them both in Hebrew and English, and it would be great to have you hear you read them out in both languages. Would you like to first read out some of your poems?
Sure. You know, in these days of the pandemic, that stretches its hand to our lives and threatens everything that is dear to us, I think we first of all realize how interconnected we are, how unique and yet separate. I mean, separate and not separate. And we stand more exposed than ever to our inner dialogue and to the basic choice between connecting to ourselves, connecting to love, and or connecting to fear and to separation. And I think this calamity is also an opportunity because poetry is an invitation to think and feel for ourselves, to have a depth dialogue with ourselves, and to newly choose our reality, our life. So the poems that I will read to you, the first one is memory, a childhood memory that this pandemic evoked. And the other two are prayers. קאמרה אובסקורה. חושך לא מבדיל בין דברים, לא מכיר את פניך, רק את קולך הטועה בין ההדים, את ריחך החמוץ מפחד, את שוקתך לקרוע את דמותך מן החושך, לקרוע לך צל מן הצללים. חושך, רחם בלי דפנות, רק עצמי בתוכי, בחדר הנעול, האפל, ילד לומד להקשיב, לגעת, להיות, דופק ואור. Camera obscura. Darkness doesn't distinguish between things, doesn't recognize you, except by your voice wandering among the echoes, by the sour smell of your fear, by your desire to reap your image out of the darkness, to reap a shadow for yourself out of the shadows. Darkness is a womb without walls. There's only myself inside myself. In the dark locked room, a child learns to listen, touch, be, pulse, and skin. And the second one I will read in English only, the Orpheus Prayer. Death and yet more death, sand and more sand. We have stood in the square hungry to be, and like mountain shadows, covered the city with pictures of a waking sleep. Was she there or wasn't she? A stranger in my body, able and yet unable, I try the air. How many more years will we walk these dead sands? The mountain is glimpsed like a vision or a mirage. Sand moves underfoot like memory with no beginning, and each place is every place. Does the way goes up or down? Are you there behind my gaze? Is my gaze there ahead of me? Where have we come from? Alone, the two of us have crossed vast marshes on the slowly melting faces of the drowned. For years we've been immortal. We saw terrible sorrow in the window. How much longer shall we walk between death and death, sand and sand? A new past give us, a new death give us this day the life of the day. And the last one, which is also a prayer of the heart, I'll read in both languages. תפילת הלב, עזור לי הקול הגדול, פגעים שחלפו כבר לשכוח, באהבתי לעולם הנח לי לשוב ולבטוח. עם שחר שמיים עולים, יום בא ויום הולך, לנשום ולהיות, לנהות, לנשור, למדני יום יום כמו עלה. רפא את הלב בחזנו, את כאב הלבבות בלבדם, באושר הלב האחד. פרוס כנפיים אהוב וסביבך, הבט בעולם האהוב, אל נא תיפול רוחך. גם מבעד ענן חשיכה, זכור אל האור הן תעוף. רפא את הלב בחזנו, את כאב הלבבות בלבדם, זכור אל האור הן תעוף, באושר הלב האחד. The heart prayer. Heal the heart in our chests, the pain of hearts in their loneliness, with the joy of the single heart. Help me, O great whole, to forget past injuries. Let me once more trust my love for the world. Sky rises, dark, then clear. A day comes, a day goes. Breathing and being, yearning, falling, teach me daily like a leaf. Heal the heart in our chests, the pain of hearts in their loneliness, with the joy of the single heart. Spread your wings, dear one, and look around you at this beloved world. Don't let your spirit fail, even in the depth of darkness. Remember, you are flying to the light. Heal the heart in our chests, the pain of hearts in their loneliness. Remember, you are flying to the light with the joy of the single heart.
Thank you so much. There are a number of there are biblical imagery here as well, particularly in the prayers, which speak of hope and optimism and the future of mankind. In one of the poems, I think you referred to, you'd written "Coming Sunrise of Man," and I find this this hope for mankind itself quite amazing at a time like this, particularly. I think a lot of us know in our hearts that, mankind is responsible for much of what is happening around us on this earth, so we probably deserve to be ravaged the way we are, So I would like to ask you where your sense of optimism comes from.
Well, I'm not a great optimist, but I try to direct my thoughts to creating a better reality for myself and for others. And I think this is the cue. If we all take responsibility for the people we love, our family, our society, and then the bigger we get at large to the whole world with its animals and trees and, of course, people, then something can change, because nothing can change the world except people. People change themselves and the world. So I feel like I speak to my fellow men, and I hope I find echo in their hearts.
I also wanted to ask you about the fact that, about you writing bilingually. Poetry, the quality of poetry is all about, it's about honesty. I think most people speak their heart out in one language over the other, even if they know languages pretty well. And but you do write poetry in both languages. Are you comfortable? I mean, is it because of your sense of comfort? How does that work?
Well, it's an adventure, because one language shapes one world, and another language shapes a different world. And I often was writing either in English or in Hebrew, and then translating it to the other language. But it wasn't a translation, because everything was reshaped in this process. And then I changed back and forth both versions in both languages, and got it actually more clear and more exact to what I really wish to say. So the more languages we know, I think, the more facets our crystal ball of poetry gets. And for me, it's a gift and an adventure. It's not a problem at all. And of course, there are languages where poets write not in their mother tongue. Arabic, for example, the language you speak and the language you write are totally different. Like Latin in the Middle Ages. Yeah? But this is not the question. The question is how dialogue, wisdom, and beauty are getting through words. And I think poetry can do it in a very unique way. Like philosophy can never do unless you are gifted poetically, like Plato or Nietzsche, because we take the words while they are still alive, shake them, understand them, misunderstand them, carried away by them, and actually take the whole scope of language into reaching a dialogue.
Thank you. Mr. Szirtes, I would actually like to pose the same question to you. In fact, I think all of you work in more than one language. So you translate Hungarian poetry, but a lot of your own poetry is in English. Why do you make that choice?
I was just 8 years old, only just 8 years old, when we came to England as refugees, and my parents decided that as soon as possible we should speak English, exclusively at home. So we did, and I learned English very quickly, but then I didn't speak Hungarian for many years. Not for 28 years. And then I returned in 84 as a poet. And then I was immediately asked to translate. I had to recover my language. So essentially, I have been translating ever since then. I'm translating right now. Poetry, fiction, drama, whatever. My Hungarian has much improved, but it will still not be good enough to be writing in Hungarian. I can hear it well enough, and I can speak it fairly fluently, but it's not good enough. And besides, I've grown into English. I've grown up with English. English was the poetry I was reading at my most impressionable age. So I'm steeped in English poetry, English language poetry. I don't mean specifically English. So that comes naturally to me. I don't imagine that will change.
Right. Dr. Chawla, I was reading your poems, and I think the variety of emotions and moods that we've been swinging to and fro from, I can see them in your poems. Would you please tell me a little bit about how you came to write it, and what was playing around in your mind when you were writing these? You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Well, my poetry is very reflective, self-reflective, and philosophical. And sometimes I feel I need to move away from abstractions. And I guess that's the way my mind works. So I'm bilingual. At home, I'm very bilingual, but I've never written in my Hindi language, which I can speak very comfortably. I studied it only up till about 8th grade or so. And then I've been, I've always wanted to be a writer. So I just studying in English medium schools, growing up in India, I was very comfortable in the English language. And then I taught English literature, studied English literature in Delhi University, and started teaching at a young age, 21. So I just felt very comfortable with the English language, and that's how I write. I do want to make my, there is a certain authenticity that, that we've been asked to write or express through very ordinary, through very immediate human experience that somehow does not, there's a lot of imagery in what I write and how I write, but I'm trying to push myself towards making my language more immediate, that perhaps just doesn't come naturally to me. And, once you I don't even focus too much on technique, because technique then severs you from, that, the inner core within you. So academically, having taught English literature, poetry, theater for so many years, I'm conscious of these various mutations, but to adopt them simply as a technique seems a little artificial or associated with a sense of artifice. And I try to write as naturally as I can, and it veers more towards philosophical poetry. Would you like me to read some of my poems right now?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, okay. Please do.
Well, I wrote this poem titled Vera Viral just about last week or so. So it's not going to be there in our anthology, but I enjoyed writing it. Glossing over our vulnerable lies, we hurl rocks, and they fall like petals. They inhabit our relentless habits, rupture wrong after wrong. So we wrestle our own shadows in defiance, a living curse. We float nimbly, go around, conjuring a virusless world in motion. We choose ultimatums in feasts of praise. Reckless, we try using beneficent bullets, seek bright shelter in lonely outlines. Isolated rhythms, pulsating, dazzling, glorious triggers of disallowed desire. Shaping us as primordial escorts, we are plunged into the littlest of beings. Barbarous, graphic nostalgia sucks in. Unfettered we fly, enveloped by gargantuan gods that swirl in alchemy alongside, dishonored, replaced. My next poem is titled Burqa/Masks. Well, there's a lot of Islamophobia around the world, and people somehow. But I thought, wearing masks has become so essential now. So it's a form of burqa, and I thought I'd write a poem on burqas or masks. They try to smother us, hidden deep within our permissive spaces. Now an invisible virus makes it an armor. A shaft of light permeates, functions as a shelter or its lack, both hidden, hiding, in hiding, secrets, the sorrow contained, protect us within a mask, humbled with unusual speed, everything forgotten in that post-fragile phase. Look beyond doubt as the progressives carry the lantern. Rebel or reformer, the obligation to mask oneself persists, spilling fire in absurd stretches, a fringe space of N95s, cloth face masks, surgical masks protect, cover the face and the sides. The virus attacks, bandanas, scarves, empower uncomfortable particles, fashion your own face covering, self-construct, cut out the rags, blast out the horror, a subtle sense of resistance to put it on, transform oneself or to disguise. Would a burqa not be the best defense? Effective as an artisanal smile disguises the pain fragile smiles wear thin, transmit the disease in profound and simple airborne respiratory droplets, life and the afterlife, marginalized in brothel-like respirators, rage anew, to strike the thing off in chronic conditions, breathless, adept artisans. How does one make love and wage peace with a virus? Another poem of mine that is included in this anthology is titled Mutating. At the turn of a metaphor, an old smell returns, doorknobs, food parcels, cardboard boxes violate its safety, coffins run amok, unwilling to settle into the ground of unequal notes, broken up, handshaking that combines data distancing. By sunrise singing, widows cut open fear from the clinging smell of soaps to peacetime talks of floating civil liberties, affixed, then ripped. Destroy the game of winners and losers. Write love poems to battles fought, tactile as panic, controlled eyes lifting, glisten with Godhead. Its rhetoric is framed, unstable as molecules, moving, evolving, thinking unto oneself, deadly and pent up, galvanized into action, fight, fleeing, quiver with soft gestures, smooth out as dream filaments, the labored action of digital steps, quiet lingering gestures, sinking deep as surveillance. As a door shuts tight, breathing encircled, then intervene with the arc of biometrics, move freely between borders, strike back torrents of smart bombs, creep into bunker busters, masked under submarines, guns that maneuver through host cells, a blood flow bereft of motion. Would there be a mutating still? And the last poem I'm going to read is titled Infinite Karmas. At the beginning was the outbreak. Blobs of swarming virus caught red-handed, fastened themselves on human lungs, above those karmic laws that got bled out. The stars rip, the effects of human intention strayed, swelled. How one lives, front-lined with gloves and masks, mock at causality, casually proliferate in invisible tweets, with red mountain clouds dismantle the short supply of legends that look us in the eye, comfort us for no reason. Does it clink a glass or two now that the ceramic wheel got broken? Does it dodge bullets, whittled by the dark scraping, bend its shape inside the deep flesh in cruel thumps, knowing no clear patterns of reactionary consequences? Pacing oneself to match an invisible, fugue-like enemy that rings in waves of new energy, in unison with the crevices the virus revisits. Wild affliction, dead to the pangs of love, of lust, reaping the aroused days of its own self. Karma's scapic bounds. Where is the blind eye of fate here? Discriminate between billing it, nor etched, nor accrued, in discrete scoops, shields of our own actions, generating, flourishing between the responsible and the not so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chawla. I actually quickly wanted to ask both you and Mr. Orr, both of you are not just poets. You write in different genres as well. So at this immediate moment when you are writing about coronavirus, is poetry what you would naturally choose to write in, or would you be, or is, for instance, is a novel something that you would like to sit with your thoughts and then put it down on paper? Is poetry the best form of expression at this point of time?
Should I go first, Mr. R?
Well, the immediate response is poetry. I'm working now on a novel, but the immediate response to what happens around me is always poetry. When this pandemic may find its place in some future novel, when it sinks deep and I digest it into my life experience, I guess. But the emotion that is carried by a poem is so intense and so immediate that I couldn't think of any other genre that I could express myself in these days.
Well, Elizabeth, I am comfortable in the comfort of poetry, but I also like to kind of, dodge my inner core, my inner self by deflecting to, what my own zone of discomfort. At my present moment, I'm subsumed with actually, I'd written this play on interracial love. I just wanted to write a very different kind of play. I've written quite a few plays. And so I wanted to write something very different. And this is on interracial love, a white American couple whose two daughters, make just the wrong choices in the 1980s. One falls in love with an Iranian and the other with an Indian. And it's kind of helps me so much to deflect, to create my own distance from, the world that we are subsumed in by kind of obsessing myself with, and we are Zoom reading and we're actually turning it into a movie because we don't see any possibility of theaters opening maybe, in the fall of 2021 or so. So it's a kind of refuge for me. It's a kind of nice, point of rest to kind of just, get obsessive about what I'm doing. So I hope that helps address what you're looking for. So I've been writing plays. I beg your pardon.
In that sense, it's like a retreat.
It's a retreat, it's a refuge, absolutely. Yes, thank you. And we're turning it into a movie, into a feature-length movie. I had to adapt it as a screenplay because the actors are more or less ready with it. It's a wonderful cast, and the cinematographer is also kind of so excited about it. So we said, okay, let's just, and even if it's even if it doesn't go anywhere, but at least, we are enjoying it. The passion, the excitement of the moment is important. So that's what I'm doing presently.
Dr. Satchidanandan, I think your poems kind of address what you were speaking about earlier about the intransience of life. So there's almost a spirituality to it. You speak of the permanence of the soul, really, and. So I would say there's an optimism in your poems as well, though they speak of death. We would love to hear some of your poems and some of your thoughts on them.
Yes, I do write, as you very well know, in Malayalam, the language of Kerala. But I have also been able to translate quite a few, maybe some 70% of those poems into English for my non-Malayali readers. And what I'm going to read are translations in English. What you said about the spiritual is true, because I believe in a kind of spirituality that transcends religious establishments, the kind of spirituality that for example, Gandhi would speak of, or the spirituality that Jesus Christ would speak of, because they didn't really belong to a particular religion. And even if they did, they were able to transcend the confines of established religion and to raise themselves into another realm of the spiritual. And that's what I think our Bhakti poets and our Sufi poets really did. And I've written a lot on those poets and about those poets in poetry as well as in prose. Here I'll read maybe one or two poems, because I don't think we have much time. I'll read two different kinds of poems to begin with. One is a very, very personal poem. Because this is also for two reasons. One, I'm simply of the past, and this poem alone is in some sense a recollection of childhood in a village where we used to use a swing that was tied to a tamarind tree. I remember all those things, and of course it has something to do with the kind of mood that all of us are in. I'll read this poem, Alone. I sit alone in my room and look out the window to make sure the world is still there. There stands a grown-up tamarind tree, a swing on one of its branches, and a boy on it, swinging higher and higher. The tree stands firm, careful. The boy doesn't fall. A calf and a cat watch the scene with raised tails. The boy's dad is reading a newspaper. It carries a girl's photo. The two children have similar faces, but the girl is dead. The life that has left her is on the branch of the tamarind tree. It is watching with excitement its living brother on the swing. I am alone in the room and looking out the window to make sure the world is still there. A horse is speeding outside. On it is a hunter who beautifies himself with young men's blood every day, like the sun. Earth trembles beneath its hooves. There is fresh blood on its mane, blood that moves on a swing. I sit alone in the room. The world sits alone outside. The bangled bough of a laburnum offers me a bouquet from the window. There is the life of a child on its crotch. That is my life. That is my life. That bouquet falls on my body. A breeze gently moves it, as if it were a swing, as if I were sitting on it, on a tamarind tree in my village compound, south of my house, north of death. And the second poem is a little more impersonal because now I am in Kerala, but I generally live in Delhi. And in Delhi, we constantly saw the migrant workers, either walking or trying to catch a train. Many of them failed to catch trains, and they walked sometimes 400, 500 kilometers to reach their villages. So here is a migrant worker who is stranded in Delhi, who has not yet found a train. So the poem is called The Train. That train is going to my village, but I am not in it. Its rails are inside me. Its wheels are on my chest, and its whistle is my scream. I won't be there when it comes back to take me, but my breath will travel seated on its roof, guarding my corpse. As the train stops at my village, my breath will enter my body and ride my waiting bicycle along the old familiar lanes. My children will come running as they hear its bell. Abu is here, Abu is here. In which language can I tell them it is my dead body that has arrived? Of heaven or of hell? I am somewhere in between. Let the well talk or the pond. If water refuses to speak, let my breath enter a crow on the drumstick tree on my courtyard and tell them the truth. I should end with one short poem, which is not in the anthology, but which is more recent, called A Small Spring. It is generally about a transience of happiness, because one of the great lessons that the period of this pandemic, the dark period, it teaches us is the lesson of ephemerality, the lesson of the transience of life, and also the transience of happiness, the transience of pleasure. And this is mainly about that. A small spring. A small spring that a casket can contain, or the pupil of an eye. So intense were its colors and odors. It couldn't have lasted long, like some adolescent loves. A small spring, like a flame of the forest in full bloom, unaware of the arrival of winter. Why did it vanish so fast? I asked the wind. A drizzle was the reply. It had some floating petals that God had kept as bookmarks in life's account book. I could not decipher the script, and they were dried up, wrinkled. A small spring, more scorching than summer, burning with pleasure. I stopped kissing anyone except solitude in its tight black gown. I opened the windows wide. Suppose it comes back, like the spilt wine returning to the cup, shouting with passion, "Come and lift me up." A small spring, a pang, my lips quiver with a desire. Cheers! Well, these are the 3 poems I really wanted to read.
Thank you. That was very beautiful. I actually wanted to ask Dr. Szirtes what, how significant do you think such a volume would be?
Well, very important, I think. I mean, it's a record of what is happening. It's not so much a record of what is happening on the level of information. It's a record of what is happening at the level of the soul and of the mind. And it happens differently in so many different people in different places. I think there's a great deal of writing, poetry writing, that has been going on throughout the epidemic. And I think there are various collections. And I think these will be, in some sense, the essence of the history.
Thank you. I think we should now head towards the audience questions, and I would ask all the viewers to click on the link, the Zoom link, to head to the Q&A session. I thank all of you for being here, and I wish this conversation could have been longer. There's just so much to talk about, which we haven't even started speaking of. And I hope the audience questions can deal with some of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.